So this is our presentation, Florida State University Art and Civics grant, and representing Somerville, Massachusetts. My name is Jessica Howard, and I am a fifth year, just completed fifth year art educator teacher at Somerville High School. I have my master's in fine art from Tufts University in the museum school, and I love working with the students every day, and I'll turn it over to Sol.
Hi everybody, my name is Sol Reem. I'm a social studies teacher at Somerville High. I teach social studies, sheltered English immersion. So I teach social studies to students who are multilingual immigrants.
So this is who we are. Just
So we're gonna start with just a brief description of the high school and of Somerville. So we're a smaller city right next to Boston and Cambridge in Massachusetts, and we're the densest, I think, densest city, urban area in maybe the whole country, definitely in Massachusetts. So in our small city, we've got almost 60,000 residents, and we've got one high school for the entire city. So every teenager in the city of Somerville, which is very diverse and very active, everyone, no matter where you're coming from, what languages you speak, goes to this high school if they go to the public high school. You can go to the next page. So we've got a really diverse population and diverse in many different descriptors of how you can describe people. We've got a very multilingual population as well. We've got a majority of our students who come from immigrant backgrounds and are multilingual or live in multilingual households. And about a quarter of our students and about 13 to 15% of our students are recently arrived to the U.S. So first generation immigrants. Um, so we've got a variety of different countries and languages represented in the students who come to our school, variety of socioeconomic contexts, and a variety of like I said, other descriptors of how you describe families and communities as well.
and we have a brand new building. Our old school was kind of taken apart, and they built a new school on our existing footprint, which just opened for our students and our staff this year. And some of our art experience for our students from the art department include Scholastic's Gold Key exhibitions. The students have rallied together and exhibited at Assembly Row Mall. Um, when the school was under construction, one of the art teams contacted the art department, and they actually collected a lot of the artwork, and it was scanned and printed on huge scrim wraps around the site, so kids could see their artwork in the public eye for about a year and a half to 2 years. And these are like massive, like little tiny drawings were blown up to about like 8 feet by maybe 10 feet each one, and it went way around the whole school just to beautify the project. We have students represented at MAEA Youth Art Month and the Recognitions, which is a juried show at the State Transportation Building. The students have also been invited to do a multicultural event 2 times in a row at Somerville District Courthouse. They have been selected to do an exhibition at the Somerville Museum and have an ongoing project this summer with QR codes, where they will have these physical frames, and students submitted their digital art to kind of like connect with the QR code, and someone will put a phone up and it'll project like a pop art into their phone from the students' work. And they've also been exhibiting at Somerville Public Library, and they've been honored with over 15 Scholastic Awards from 2017 to the present, including gold, silver, and honorable mention.
So we've got this one school in this very, very diverse city and with a lot of exciting opportunities. But our school in our city is not immune to, is completely like ensconced in the network of systemic inequities and disparities. And so we both came into this project wanting to do our part to make our classes and our curriculum more relevant to students' lives and interests, more critical, more tangible. And speaking as both of us have taught multilingual students, multilingual immigrant students, and they were specific kind of target point or specific kind of like group of students that we really wanted to make sure we were extending good, high quality, relevant, engaging, critical curriculum to. Um, and so that's where we're coming in to this project and to this presentation from. And so as we continue presenting, we're gonna just describe what Jessica and I experienced during our participation in this in the last few months, and then we're going to add a little bit of SHS flavor and kind of describe to you how we approached it as staff members of Somerville High. And then finally, we'll overview our unit plan with our essential questions, our artists, and relevant materials.
So one of the important parts of our planning was Zoom meetings with both all the other teams. And these are just a few points that or questions that we thought to record, and just want to honor the other thinking space created by everybody in the teams, especially our facilitators, Dr. Fenler, Dr. Shields. So I'll just say one point that I thought was really good is that art doesn't represent one moment in time, but it's all expansive.
Yeah, just to echo what Jessica said, part of this experience in coming up with these curricula were three long days over the course of the spring semester where we met with Christopher and Allison and Candace and the other teachers who presented yesterday, and we really discussed just the bigger picture of what it means to combine social studies, civics, history, and art. And so and definitely from these conversations I'm taking away the creative potential of art and how that's a place of resistance and a piece of resistance for anyone who is creating. So I was as a history teacher, it's I think a lot about analyzing, critiquing, studying, expressing, and to be able to add the art element, which is about creating and transforming. I really have learned a lot from this process. I We also wanted to describe in the vein of describing to you what we were experiencing as we came up with this curriculum. We wanted to show you a little bit of how Dr. Shields and Dr. Fendler set up our work and our big brainstorming from the wide to the narrow. So um, so there were some big blank structures where we were first discussing what makes Somerville Somerville and what makes our Somerville community a Somerville community, and just we were trying to figure out like what we wanted to highlight of the community. You can go to the next page. Similar idea, there were these so Dr. Schultz and Dr. Fendler gave us these blank templates where with kind of like information and guiding questions, and then a big empty space for us to start brainstorming. Next page.
And so our original search began with brilliant artists like these. We looked at Tori Bullock, who is like a performance artist in Boston, Kristen Fentroy, who does a lot of dance and with also differently abled individuals, Akua Holmes, who actually has a show coming up at the MFA and does a lot of like children's illustrations and children's books. Another book that you may have seen or read is Out of Wonder, has illustrations by Akua Holmes. And then Rasheen Fahandej, who has been exhibiting at the ICA and is like a film artist. And so we really like, because Rasheen Fahandej works local and did some kind of poetic movements in terms of video and film and animation and project and installation. Her work really spoke to us because it encompasses like a space that you can walk inside of. It's so beautiful, just aesthetically, and especially this one particular piece that was exhibited at the ICA Boston, which is the Institute of Contemporary Art, called Father's Lullaby. And so we really kind of zoomed in on Father's Lullaby. And these are a few stills on the screen that you can take a look at. And she's just a lovely, lovely artist. And I'll turn it over to Sol.
Yeah, and you can see from the last slide to this how the structure in which we were working went from broad um, to specific. So we thought of community resources, just artists working in the community, and then we started thinking about how the artist's work relates to what we wanted to highlight and what we wanted to achieve and what the kind of intervention we wanted to make at the school. And the reason why we chose to center around Fandich and Father's Lullaby is because of this idea of transforming space that and because we really want to center around the place of Somerville High School, which is literally on top of a hill, literally in the middle of a city, the one high school for the whole city. It is this like very symbolic place in multiple ways, physically, um, socioeconomically, obviously, and it is a place that is very, very important, that kind of like absorbs all the systemic inequalities of the context that we live in, but also a space where everyone who is there um, has the potential to actually make it a welcoming and an inclusive space. So we really love the idea of how Fund Edge transforms the room and the space that we're in, and we wanted to channel that to like getting our students to really be able to transform the space that they're in, to make it an inclusive or welcoming or more critical or more um, or a better, more just place. The idea that you can transform physical aspects of walls, sound, like evoke emotions, make connections. And we really wanted to like bring that transformation of space into the high school, adding kind of like agency for students to be able to do that transformation. So in the next slide, you'll see something that we're gonna go over more in depth, which is how we went from essential questions to getting students to understand some key like lens for analyzing social lives, and then getting them to work on a project where they're creating an animation like inspired by Fandage's transformation of physical space. We wanted to also highlight again the I want to kind of like unveil the behind the scenes of the process. So you'll see that this was a working backwards kind of structure, a very like broad working backwards kind of structure, from essential questions to overall curriculum objectives to assessment outcomes for students.
And the point of of departure for our unit.
We as I was saying before, you can read on this screen something that I was mentioning in our last slide. We are really focusing on Somerville High School and transforming the space in Somerville High School, and transforming in a very literal space, like projecting sound, etc. And so our unit plan includes a public element at the high school, and students are going to learn animation, and they're going to make private and collective animations that will be used to transform a space in the high school. And the outcome is going to be an exhibition, and also a teacher documentation of the kind of growth that students uh, showed through the process, through the semester.
And so more about like how it's going to come into play. June Jordan serves as a guide to my teaching and inspiration to our students. Utilizing her writing prompts and structures promotes creative storytelling from first personal point of view. Her style reinforces our goal to have students arrive at the premeditation that is the visual expression of their oppression through her writing styles to transform their ideas into the final form. So, which will be the animation. So because of her prompts about homeland, about oppression, about utilizing the five senses as a writer, our thought, especially as an art teacher, to kind of handle an animation, they're not going to start at the final product of the 1 minute animation. They're going to be doing like short-term projects, and then eventually build into the creation of their film and learn techniques through software applications, through Adobe, and like little exercises with dynamic and static. But because if for those of you that don't know who June Jordan is, she was born in Harlem in 1936 and grew up in Brooklyn. She was a poet, an activist, a teacher, and an essayist. She is really like motivating to bring in multidisciplinary and voices of all over the world from students. And so this is a poem, and I'm just going to pause for a second and let the audience read this on your own. And so as you can see, like it's not a narrative style that is typical prose. She's very famous for her line breaks. And she's also famous for having kind of like a cadence or a style to, to just being honest to her own voice. So because of the way she taught storytelling at UC Berkeley, where I was a student undergrad, I bring that forth in almost every lesson that I teach, and she's always like an inspiration there.
So with June Jordan as kind of, and her pedagogy is kind of like a place of inspiration and guidance for us, we're also going to introduce and have students work with other voices, important voices talk talk about oppression and also resistance and also creation. So we're going to be centering texts from James Baldwin, Angela Davis, and Frederick Douglass. And as students are working with these voices, we're asking them to interact with their themes, and again, using these and the artists who we'll talk about briefly to be able to start thinking about how they can analyze oppression and how creation of something is an act of resistance towards different levels of oppression.
And so like some of the text will be close reading text styles will be converted into imagery. So literary text, there's manipulation in like form and format from all authors. And so those will be translated into like architectural spaces to give the students a hands-on experience of like how to begin to use transform tools in Photoshop and how to begin to program comfortably with static before they go into dynamic imagery. Um, and then continuation on how students will meet the outcome. We'll also take a look at artist John McNamara, his contemporary oil paintings, experimental animators, music videos, and linguistic theories by Dr. Robert Kaplan. Um, and then Fahandej is our main artist, our master exemplar artist, and we'll be looking at the film and installation. We'll think about what draws or evokes a sensory response in storytelling by utilizing elements of art such as light and space and storytelling, and thinking about the themes of oppression and the four eyes of oppression and resistance. Um, this is some of John McNamara's work, which we'll look at a little bit later, but we begin to look at like the nonlinear explanation of time and thinking about how to create a composition in art that is themed around time, but also nonlinear. Dr. Kaplan has a study about English is very much linear. You have a thesis, point A, point B, point C. Some of the things that happens in other native languages is that it's not a linear narrative, and sometimes narratives spiral inward, and sometimes narratives zigzag, and sometimes it goes completely backwards. So the disjointed or dismantled composition is something that we're looking at. And so we're looking at Fahandej's quiet and poignant response to kind of think about how do we engage our classes and our students to kind of hear from each other's perspectives about their own stories of oppression, or thinking about time, or thinking about disparity, or just resistance and resiliency. They'll be looking at her special effects. How did she synthesize the film? How did Fahandej edit? How did Fahandej, what choices were made in the composition of that animation, Mother's Lullaby?
So you can see that we're both bringing areas of expertise into this project. Jessica, as the art teacher, is bringing in a huge wealth of knowledge about artists, and how students can learn to become artists or learn while being artists. Um, and I'm bringing in experience with working with multilingual students, making things accessible to everyone, which Jessica has as well, and uh, experience with teaching kind of like a social critical analysis directly to students and working with them. And so we included this slide as just kind of, again, in the vein of unveiling the behind the scenes, about how we kind of divided up and both brought in our expertise. You can see that while Jessica was designing the outlines for an art-based lesson, I would be adding in some modifications or sentence starters, modifications of texts, pre-teaching vocabulary. Um, if you go to the next slide, you can see how we have been thinking about language objectives, vocabulary to explicitly teach, language features in that second chunk, that language features that will help students express what they are seeing and thinking as we are exposed to the multiple sources, visual and text-based and musical sources that we're going to incorporate in our curriculum.
So we're just gonna play, and please speak up if the sound isn't sharing. I think it is, but this is a quick interview and glimpse of the original Father's Lullaby.
Fais dodo, Maya, mon petit frère, fais dodo, t'auras du lolo, on dormira bien vite, dormira bien vite.
A Father's Lullaby is a multi platform, multi year, and research based project.
Blackbird fly.
It's basically a poetic investigation and reflection on the issue of mass incarceration and how it impacts lower income communities and communities of color, particularly. The first layer is this 26-minute of very poetic encounter with the lullabies, with some of the narratives and the stories, starting with this graph, very visual and beautiful, what is actually the trend of incarceration from 1925 to 2015. I asked community members to share lullabies and memories of their own childhood as a way of getting closer to this space of absence and what does it mean for the children who didn't have that space or opportunity. When you ask about lullaby, everybody immediately goes to a very personal space, whether they had a personal relationship with a lullaby or they would just remember their childhood or their children's childhood. The beauty of the word lullaby is that it will immediately take you to that personal and intimate, like close space. But then I had fathers who shared songs that they were saying, "Oh, I don't remember singing any lullaby, but we would like sing in the car together," and this is like that's what they shared. Or I had like other men that they share songs that their father would sing.
And I say, brother, help me, please. Sometimes he winds up knocking me back on my knees.
Most of the men that you see in the gallery are the community members that participated and give voice to this issue. There are also incarcerated men in the mix. Then there are 3 touch panels that they're a portrait documentary of the father. And I consider that a deep witnessing space that you consciously decide to sit down and listen to those narratives and stories. And you can hear them only when you're holding your hand and you're activating that space. And then the third layer that is very important, the audience participation. So there is a website that you're encouraged to activate the QR tag or go to the website, and everybody could go record their own lullabies or memories of childhood or reflection on this issue. So I think about that space of it as a poetic movement, like how an art project could encourage or propel people to share their own personal history in order to give voice to a very complex social justice issue. I really believe that the space of art and artistic encounter have the capability to move us in a very different way. I grew up as a Baha'i in Iran, which is a persecuted minority. So when you look at the major points of life, there has been a lot of challenges and difficulties and discrimination. But I think what it was very different was the amount of love and care that I had, that my parents were carrying for us. It was not just love for us, but love for everybody. And they were practicing it in their daily life. There was not a day that my mom would cook just for us. There was always, like, my dad would always bring strangers to our home. So that sort of space of openness and loving, unconditional loving, despite the hardship that you were experiencing, was very interesting and like profound space of an experience. There are certain expectations that we have of men. We rob away like a very important part of manhood, this sort of nurturing being. It's really beautiful to see the fathers who share, and it's important a space for them.
Fedodo Mayam.
Um, so basically, the Father's Lullaby, we're gonna repeat the exposure to the class multiple times in order to build their vocabulary and have the students understand Fahandaj as a master artist, and also to kind of like engage them even more. So we'll show it once, and then we're going to start doing demos with exploring the four eyes of oppression and resistance, because without content knowledge, the animation will lack meaning, and it really to create something and come from yourself and something that's so important to you is how as part of the artistic intent and part of what makes the film successful or not. We'll show it again after they learn about the content of the four eyes of oppression from a civics lens. And then we're going to record their observations after they see it the second time. We'll analyze Davis and Baldwin and McNamara, and then we'll show it again, each time increasing their knowledge and exposure to the art world, the whole world as we know it, with from the past, present, and their spot is the spot that's into the future. They'll be practicing animation techniques and nonlinear storytelling. We'll show it again and record their observations. Students will create and manipulate a time of animation. So they're not going to do the standard timing of animation. One of the rules in their composition is that they have to effectually choose a time frame, whether it's choppy like stop motion, whether it's in fast forward, it pauses, it crescendos and denouements like a novel. They get to choose the sequencing of time and the speed that has a point to it. Like they have to define what is that effect of the time? What is that time? They'll include oppression as a theme in their own personal storyboarding and animation creation. And then we'll show, they'll all receive each other's, and then they'll also see it again for Father's Lullaby. And hopefully by the act of doing and creating and participating, they'll have a stronger sense of how to discuss, interpret, criticize, and evaluate a masterpiece of artwork with a sense of civic engagement and social responsibility to their generation and to their class. We'll be measuring their animations with a rubric about time and merit and content, and we'll also be thinking about craftsmanship. And in the meantime, all those observations through this cycle of repetition and constant analysis as a scholar will be recorded by the teachers, which will be edited into a film. And it'll just be like their hands and they're working on the craft of paper or the board or however the exercises pan out.
So we've got here on this slide the 5 overall general objectives for this curriculum from which we'll work backwards. And these 5 objectives are actually also in order. So you can work backwards from the bottom up to go from um, um, the overall goal and what kind of general objective students will have to be able to do in order to achieve that overall goal. And before I begin talking about these objectives, just just as a uh, a piece of context, if Sarah or Rachel could link the artist, the activist art outcomes, because the little bullet points after each bolded objective is speaking to an activist art outcome, which is something that really spoke to us about how, again, art is resistance and creation is resistance. It's not like analyzing and critiquing is necessary, and creation will and resistance is also kind of like the purpose, the point of being able to analyze oppression. um yeah, so with that in mind, we've got kind of like an activist art outcome for each objective. Each objective, we're asking students to do things so that students can learn to reveal reality. Students can learn about how art is about creating disruption. Students can learn that art is about transforming environment, etc., etc. um, Starting from the bottom going up, the overall goal is to be able to get students to create an animation that identifies and authors a narrative about oppression, and resists oppression and an act of oppression in their impact of oppression in their personal lives. And by creating the narrative, it's the act of resistance, and these animations will be exhibited publicly. And so in order to get there, students are going to explore Fandej's as a father's lullaby as a master artist. And they'll also use the lens of interpersonal, internalized, institutional, and ideological oppression, being able to learn those terms, that words, and being able to identify these types of oppressions and what we study in the different texts that we study. And we'll also be able to always identify resistance in these stories and in these texts. And we're students are also going to be learning, obviously, the techniques, concepts, and manipulation of time in animation. um, Sorry, I have some stuff I wanted to add, but I think I'll save it for another more relevant spot. I did take some notes from this. I've watched that video at Fandej a lot, but some new things came up, but I think there'll be space to talk about it in other slides. So we can go to the next one.
So we're just going to talk about a little bit about our rubrics and how to measure our evidence of understanding from the student, and seeing the student as the genius. So basically, this will be given out to the students before they start, just to give them, an idea or a kind of a schedule or agenda of like what is the task, and what should be included. So there is obviously the themes are oppression, resistance, and time. And then there's a plus or minus sign because student choice is really important in the classroom, I think. And so students can add another theme if they want to, or maybe they don't want to say it's oppression and resistance. Maybe they just want to say it's just about resistance and also time. But this kind of gives them a little bit of criteria and structure before they start to go on this freedom of exploration and self-discovery. And then all imagery should be appropriate. We're a public high school, so everything has to be appropriate. We do have a handbook, so everything needs to be appropriate and safe for a high school student, including the content. They'll also have the personal time measurements of frame sequencing and hand edited images, and it should be in MPEG-4 at the very end or something similar. And they'll also be designing classwork. So as the art rubric concept is really, really important, as well as quality. I always tell the students, you don't have to be Michelangelo, but if you could just try. I really think that a steadfast slowly increasing, going up, 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 is way better than a really beautiful artist that never pushes their chair in at the end of the day, doesn't take feedback. I do think quality is important, but it's not the only thing that's being measured. So yes, quality is important to know that they're applying the techniques or even inventing their own techniques, which happens a lot. But so that's kind of like part of it, but not everything. The timeliness that they could work within time management and kind of learn how to time manage themselves with short little tiny projects built into a much bigger long-term project. And they get to choose their elements of art, whether it's repetition and pattern, whether it's light and value. Those are two choices that they will make and will be graded accordingly. Composition will be looked at how they sequence and how the narrative flows. That they could think on their own at times is important. That the students have a way of thinking independently and they realize their own solutions, not always asking for help or even turning to each other in the lab and asking for help. That's really encouraged. But the most important, I think, is the effective effort. Somerville Public Schools enables the teachers to sign up for Skillful Teacher. It's like a workshop, and our department supervisor, Dr. Project, recommended that I take that a long time ago. It's the most valuable thing I have ever learned. I used to look for talent when I first started teaching, and currently I look for the student who is trying to grow, that is not relying on luck, that is putting in that effective effort and constantly trying to better themselves, and that they're teachable, that they receive your feedback, that they keep bringing questions, and that they just they show self-efficacy, and that they're just growing. That's, even if they're a not yet student, those I just welcome the effort the most. So the materials, it's a digital animation. So currently we just got a brand new school, which took a lot of sacrifice from a lot of other students in their time at SHS having modular classrooms. But luckily we were gifted Wacom tablets from one of the assistant superintendents a few years back. Ms. Almy, thank you. We have a computer lab. The media department has a green screen room for recording. There is an audio theater and lecture hall and a new auditorium that's kind of reconstructed from our old construction. There's a fab lab and a maker space. We do luckily have a subscription, thank goodness, for Adobe. And just recently we had a friend donate a camcorder, and another community member friend donate a digital SLR, and all the students have K drives to store, which is very minimal. It actually slows down the computers, but it's something. And then there's a new library in Sora, and they have us. And so what we're thinking about adding is mini tripods, because not every one of our students has access to a smartphone, but many of them do, most of them. That's why the cameras are really important for us to have been received as donations. So thank you so much to those that donated. And then we're gonna request a terabyte US memory for each student, because that will be able to hold their video files while they're working on them. And then because we have the Wacom tablets that are just a black screen, it's not the video screen. They're really handy, but what would make the details and the students feel more comfortable is to update the pencils into either the Nori digital, which is basically like a hexagonal shape, so it's really good for fine and gross motor skills, or the high uni, which is a little bit more expensive, but they come in multiple tips, and it also has the same uni wood surrounding the digital core. So it actually has a much more stable feel, as like a traditional artist is used to. So one of the essential questions, I'm just going to go through these really quickly, that our students are going to face is, what is time? And the idea behind this is that to give a student a really, really broad question, like, what is color? I teach a disability class at SHS Art 1 for differently abled students, either on the autism spectrum or also Down syndrome, or just different learning abilities. And so when I ask them what is color, they're saying, Miss, that's time is color, or it's a taste, or color is a season, or color, and they have so many different answers. So one thing that we thought of is just have a really huge question. So in Fahandej, time could be incarceration and the time lost from a father with their children. But we want to have these children list about 25 big discovery questions and answer, what is time? Is it waiting for the AP exam to start to them? Is it, we just don't know. Is it the Instagram instantaneous moment of a like? We don't, it could be anything. right? So we're going to ask the students, what is time?
I think you should discuss this one, Jessica, because it's
okay. And then we're thinking about, how does the presentation of time affect our understanding of reality? So that's a really big question too. So when the students are developing their sequencing or their rule for how does the animation happen, is it stop motion and is it 4 frames per second? And that would be really, really slow. Is it more like 16 frames per second? Is it more like 24 frames per second or 40 time frames per second? We're letting them think about how, when somebody receives your work or perceives your artwork, the timing is a lot to do with everything. So if you think about like the news and how we now look at news instantaneously on 80 different channels versus back in the day it was a newspaper, and the time to absorb a fact such as a horrendous crime or a movement for justice, there are different elements of how to concentrate and receive this information and how to respond, and how we understand our reality. So whether you want to draw, the artist wants to draw you in for a very, very long time, and then presto, it's the crescendo and it ends up changing colors in the very end, or that moment of time in The Wizard of Oz where everything is sepia tone, and then Dorothy goes to the door and she walks in and it's in Technicolor, right? So when we slow down the elements of art for these students, they can realize the way they craft their story and the way they deliver this story, whether it's a new word, like for the students, it could be disparity. And they just may want to focus on that one word and figure out, how do you illustrate disparity in your own life? Their memories, their ways of presenting these elements of art will be affecting the audience, and their role as the artist is to think about, when they have this idea, does the artist resonate with this same mentality or idea or concept that they're trying to come across through the manipulation of time?
Exactly. So we've got this kind of like deep dive into time as an element that they can use to author or to create a personal story. So it's one thing to tell students like tell a story. It's another thing to explore techniques and ways to author, um, and what impact that authorship choice has, and like what they want to tell about the story and which story they want to tell. But then we have this bigger question about why we tell stories in the first place. And this is connected to why we ultimately chose Bandage and A Father's Lullaby to be our master artist. Um, as again, like Pandit said, she wanted to share her own personal story in order to give voice to a complex social issue. And this idea that personal stories, that creation and authorship of these stories are ways to give a humanizing, important voice of like joy, love, openness, courage, tenderness to these bigger, like statistical or painful experiences of different levels of oppression in our lives. And so, this idea that we transform space, we transform time, and we choose and author stories that not only describe oppression, but also act and describe resistance is our third essential question.
And so we're going to be looking at other artists that manipulate time, like John McNamara and his nonlinear construction. And just what's interesting about Mr. McNamara is, or Professor McNamara, he utilizes photography and painting. And he creates this idea that photography is like a frozen moment of time, but he uses photographs in a number of his works. He uses photographs of people who are engaged doing different things in different parts of the world on a particular day or of a year to make sense of a new place or time. Other times he'll take people that are the same age, but they're coming from different decades, and he fuses them into the painted reality. So it teaches the students, by looking at McNamara, he works a lot with the self and others in his lectures, and he lets the students know you can totally create your own realization of what time is by merging, by compositing, by kind of intercepting or integrating new narratives with existing stories and how to weave those together in like kind of like a disjointed way of just appropriating kind of stories and just redrawing them or making something else happen. Sol, you want to take this on?
Just to reiterate, our final project is going to be we're going to work throughout the curriculum to have students be able to make a 30-second animation. That's going to be the medium for these stories, personal stories that create and transform and act in resistance in response to having identified levels of oppression and also examples of resistance in their personal lives. And then these 30-second personal animations will come together to become a collaborative class animation, and this will be projected and experienced in the physical space of the one high school.
These are just the 2019 mass frameworks, creating and presenting. And these are the areas that we're trying to use as targets for the state standards, national standards, also connecting.
And from the civics side, we've got Massachusetts frameworks as well for civics, and these are coming from the civics project that all students are required to do. Civics projects should develop students' civic knowledge, civic skills, and civic dispositions. I'm really focusing on the civic skills aspect where students are learning how, like I said, how creation is resisting, how to identify, analyze, and explain what's happening in their lives, how systemic factors affect what's happening in their lives, at the same time of how humans and how their loved ones are resisting, are creating, are transforming. And so this is the civic side that's coming in.
And then, like we spoke about before, we're going to document and present the students, because a lot of times students will I had one student, she's going to Brown, and she sent a little thank you card at the end, and she said, thanks for watching her grow. And a lot of times students like that, that sense of being in the mirror and knowing that someone else is observing their growths and the moments that they're super proud and being seen as an individual or as a scholar. And so we thought it would be really important to kind of let the students, as they go through this whole process, show them how they've grown through a film or documentary of themselves. That's just a collection of their notes or their journals or their storyboarding flaws or mistakes or eraser moments, or all of the good and the challenges and the parts that they said, oh yeah, I remember that. It helps to see yourself kind of climb. So that's something that we'll try to work on to show the students at the end as well.
We've got some really good sources inside Somerville that will help us kind of help us as we build students up to be able to tell stories, to empower themselves, to also give some multilingual access as well.
These are some of the books that are currently they let me borrow them from the public library, and they're everything that a teacher might need to start working with animation. My background is in fine arts, and I've also exhibited across the country before I was married, and I know a lot about Photoshop and static image manipulation. What I'm also learning while building this unit is about animation. And while I've done motion through Photoshop, which is available, you just on the upper right hand corner, you're just going to click, instead of it say like graphic design or photo, you can just go over to motion and you have your timelines. There's also Adobe Premiere and iMovie and things like that. So these are some resources that can help teachers alike kind of go through some of the shortcuts and some of the handy keyframes that need to be manipulated.
You can see that Jessica is a seasoned, experienced art educator. And again, here is a few of the different voices, texts, voices of resistance, and also examples of identifying and analyzing society through the lens of the four eyes of oppression.
And then these are just some more resources from our field guide. We're also looking at music video is really important to think about too. So I love, oh my God, I can't even think. Bob Marley's son is Damian Jr. Gong Marley, and he made a song with Nas. And so this is one of his images here that we're going to actually look at. It's just really interesting image manipulation in terms of color and how to splice and how to do kind of a lot of technically advanced things. But what I found in the computer art classroom and the advanced computer art classroom at Somerville High School is these students excel so fast. So if you're giving them like college ed material and concepts, they just do it, and they just rise to the occasion every single time. So we're trying to, start at every facet of difficulty, whether it's super basic and just hands-on and everyone hands-free and just start to work. And then also have available these like master artists out there in the community in the world of contemporary art that are showing them, hey, invent something new and try to figure out how to dissect something and then in order to reconstruct it. So we'll also be looking at James Baldwin texts and also looking at maybe even Tupac in terms of the haves and the have-nots and just giving them some more exemplars.
Circling back, and we've got a different presentation of, again, what we're doing during this curriculum. There'll be learning techniques, there'll be learning, understanding, and applying ability to apply the lens of four eyes of oppression. There'll be planning, storyboarding, authoring stories. There'll be creating, and there'll be critiquing and collaborating, and we will be documenting, guiding, collecting, charting growth.
And so that concludes our presentation. And before we take any questions, comments, and feedback, we just want to give a special thanks. Thank you, Dr. Sarah and Dr. Rachel, and all the other teams, and to Somerville Public Schools and our family and friends.
Thank you guys. I was
Thank
just
you.
so enthralled with the presentation and the artists that you brought in and the whole process. So I'm not going to talk through all your questions, so let's see if see if other folks have questions.
I don't know how to articulate the question. I think that the program is really amazingly well prepared in terms of the connection with the artists, in terms of the all the technology, the programs, and so on. It's amazing. But one thing that for me is like very difficult to, you talk over about oppression and about oppression. And then, somehow it's not defined within the context of the populations that you're planning to work with. We don't, at least I know that you talk about the population of the school at the beginning, but I would like to know how many of those students are African-American, how many of those students are Latino, the different ethnic backgrounds, because then accordingly to that, we have then to envision how the oppression work within those population. Like, for example, the difference between middle classes that, they took over these notions of nuclear family, and then they have one or two children, and more than that they could pay for college. The type of experience, at least for African-American, I don't know if you have the groups then that they're, low income and then they're first generation in college, the experience of families maybe not the same. And I think that we have to have a, because I think oppression could function in a white family, middle class, wealthy, and then, but the type of oppressions then that one encounter when you're coming from racial backgrounds then have to do with, that your ancestors, they were slaves. And then as a consequence, you have a history of family then that was separated. And then they have a different impact at least in contemporary culture, in terms that the parents, maybe one of the parents are in prison, all these type of key things, and that importance then to delineate, because then like that, for example, you will be able to deal with different or bring people then that speak about different type of socialization that happen in relation to race, ethnicity, and class, social class. So I think that oppression for me need to be specified to be deal with the different type of populations that you have there, and then that they could think in when you're talking about transformation and resistance. This type of resistance can be articulated different, and then for me, one of the problems then that I was trying to see social activism, but I think it's this type of transformations then that you're looking is more at a personal level. It's a type of personal questioning, at least that is the impressions that I have, then that they have then to question the structures of the family that they encounter at the personal level to create another options or another version of family. What is not collective, is more personal. And I think that for me, then I was questioning me, the activation is not a collective, but it's more individual, depending on the narrative of the family or the history of the family that the student have. So then how can we translate this into a social outcome that will promote some kind of social change in the structures of the different structures of families that have been created as a consequences of historical of racism, discrimination, sexism, and all of those, because those are structural, not just individual.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit about the student demographics at your school? I think that's the kind of maybe beginning point for Sonia's.
Yeah, Jessica can present that slide in the beginning that talks about demographics. I also want to say that the purpose of what we design, what we design has a purpose, which is about the process of analyzing one's personal life and the process of creating something as an act of resistance through authorship. That meant, and an element that we're going to ask students to develop and think about deeply is the manipulation of time as authorship. And so we really didn't want to give them, we talked about maybe like doing a focus, like a case study focus on like mass incarceration or like family separation or like immigration detention. We talked about having specific case studies, but we actually decided to go for a process of analyzing students' own personal lives. They're analyzing their own personal lives, and we would equip them with the language and framework of interpersonal, institutional, ideological, and internalized oppression for students to use to equip students to analyze and to author. We decided not to give them like, hey, you're Black, so like here's your oppression. We just chose not to go for that kind of sociological study, and again decided to focus on the process of like seeing examples, of analyzing, participating, and then authoring.
Mhm. Also, sometimes in our, like, we're a sanctuary city. So since the pandemic, things are a little bit different, climate wise. But before we went into the pandemic, I'll just call them student J. There was a student in class who had to work 3 jobs. His family was deported, and he was about 17 and living on his own. There are other stories where kids have been ripped out of, I don't know about every teacher's classroom, but I had kids taken out of class because of court cases with ICE. Some of the resistance movements in our school were to post, how do you know your rights? How do you know when you don't have to open your door if someone's banging on it? Those were some student movements through this, like the students trying to help each other be educated and educate each other's family. Those posters we put up in multiple languages. We didn't want to tell the students that they like what they have to make in terms of the meaning. We wanted, it's really important to I feel as a teacher, if a student feels comfortable in that relationship is building and those connections are happening, they're gonna decide what they feel like they can do. And like Sol mentioned, we didn't want to just talk about like labeling or just or designating or anything like that. It's basically open-ended for how the student wants to be involved in the project.
I'll say too, when we recruited teacher teams, it's been almost a year now, but when we put out the call for teams to be involved in this project, the grant was approved for us to work with teachers that are working currently in one of 4 contexts. So either historically immigrant communities, historically Black communities, historically Latinx communities, or historically Indigenous communities. So all of our teacher teams in this group applied because they're working in schools that exist inside of those communities. We felt it was really important for the projects to happen in communities that are overlooked in conversations about civics, especially when civics is often viewed as this kind of like duty as an American and the underlying assumptions about what that means. Jessica and Sol's community is a historically immigrant community. So language then becomes the kind of lens through which, at least it seems to me, maybe you all are thinking about access and oppression and what that means for your student population. Yeah. Are there any other questions? We had some questions in the chat. Or some comments. Anyone else?
I'm kind of curious while other folks are gathering their thoughts. If how are the students Sol in your class also in Jessica's class? Is it one group of students?
I can answer that. So I see all of like everybody from 9th grade to 12th grade, including special arts, which is like called Art 1. And so I have mostly general population. So anybody who is an SEI sheltered English immersion student, or could be, you know, the valedictorian. It could be someone who's got a paraprofessional and has autism. It's everybody. Sol?
And I in the content areas, multilingual students who are immigrants to the U.S. get placed in sheltered classes based on their English level. So while Jessica does not have sheltered classes, I teach only sheltered classes, which means for English learners. Yep. So Jessica and I share a lot of students, but it's not systematically scheduled that all of my students take Jessica's class.
And I teach like a variety of classes. So like it'll be, so what we're thinking of in the future is that it would either be the portfolio class, which are artists that are working on post-secondary portfolios and are very serious in their artistic expression, and also have like specific dedications in terms of what they really, really like to work on. And I've known them for a few years, to students or even a computer art class where they can actually hand manipulate in Adobe Photoshop, and get the IT support from John Breslin and Mr. Mucci, and then our classes, wherever the schedule overlaps, so social studies and art, we can kind of meld them together through a span of time in the future.
It could be this is like I said, this curriculum has a purpose, and it's got a skeleton, it's got master artists, and it can be really, because Jessica and I are individual teachers with individual classes, there's lots of different adaptations. Like her master portfolio students could be working with my multilingual, maybe a newcomer class, and like they could be collaborating stories plus animation. There's a lot of different ways to pull our students together. And again, Somerville High School is almost like a microcosm of the U.S. On the surface, like very well resourced and wealthy, also loves to talk about community and diversity, but has some very real problems in terms of structural policies and lack of access, and specifically some very real problems. And so I think that there's gonna be like a lot of different ways that creating access between people, and a lot of ways that Jessica and I will have to be creative in order to like figure out how to get like cross a lot of these like structural divisions.
Any other link? Oh,
Morris, I see your hand.
yeah.
Hi, yeah. I kind of came in late, but I actually started an animation company last year, and there's a link in there that allows students big screen VR. It allows you to watch work that you create together in a virtual reality experience. And I think it's incredible because maybe you can bring people closer to the narrative without disarming the depth of the content, because at times animation can come off mature, unmature, it comes in different levels and stages and things of that nature. But you might be able to just continue to keep organizing people in a fashion where they can be together, just like we're here together in Zoom. But younger children seem to be really infatuated with Roblox and stuff like that, and being able to engage them on a level where they are present, like watching Roblox videos on YouTube, stuff like that. They do that very often. I even heard a story about a kid that spent $15,000 of their parents' money on Roblox. So there is an investment, I feel, in these intersections of race, gender, and what's happening with the current immigration problem in America. But it seems to be an immigration problem all over the world, interculturally. But I think technology is failing in a lot of ways to bring everyone to the table. You have a few people that know a bunch of things, and then you have like a very small majority of people who know how to create systems and modules that deploy, like a lot of these mood algorithms that are being used to, drive people. Oh, it's called Roblox, Roblox. Roblox even went to the stock market this year, so kids can actually invest in their own experience. But all those things imagined, the policy side of being able to enact fine art is become it's become stifling. Applying for grants and then trying to then make what you see, but still being subjugated to rules of the institution. So a lot of the institutional problems that people are experiencing with students being removed from classes, or students not being able to access information or access the same information as students that are coming from like parochial or private schools, it's still a problem because they have their own sets of libraries. And when you go into a public school environment, the public school kids, especially kids of African descent, those children struggle with learning in the capacity that history is being told to them. It's just kind of like the problem, with all these holidays that we have. They're told a certain kind of way. They're not they're not actively used as a way to uplift. I mean, I didn't really see how Juneteenth created any type of restorative justice for Black folks, especially Black people that come from the lineage of sharecropping and Jim Crow. If your family was impacted or affected by that, there is no real movement towards repairing that. And even in the arts industry, you see a lot of people getting grants, mainstream people getting grants and funding, and the students or the kids that's going to grow up eventually to get these jobs, they're being blocked out. And by the time they get into the industry, they're using tools, but they're not developing any content. They're just revisioning content. And this revisionist history that's being used in schools and in mainstream arts industry, I feel is like the hugest problem. And, and even when I looked at the graphic there, I saw that 10% was African-American. And a lot of times, you have a lot of kids are just checking out, they just check out and they're not being met in the middle. And then you have an incarceration rate that's like over 25%. Like, like for instance, white women are far more incarcerated than any other woman population going to jail this current day. But when you look at the increase of Black men still being incarcerated, that's still climbing. And so the Latinx folks, I feel like there's a discrepancy there too, because recently there's been a huge spillover in Oakland, California, with Latinx communities kind of like dealing with anti-Blackness in their community, and how that is driving a wedge in between this movement of discussing how people have been oppressed in the Caribbean, have been oppressed here, have been oppressed in different parts of Africa, all through Africa, really. And then other people that are dealing with these same problems of being darker skinned that live in different parts of Asia. So there's a huge problem, I feel, with anti-Blackness not being addressed in an economic way.
Well, here's the thing that I
Yeah.
think is really interesting about what you just said, and it goes to the heart of, I think, what the two groups talked about. And it really goes to the moment that we're in politically, where a governor like our governor here in Florida is using, he's like constricting the way people can talk about race in their classrooms, right? And I think what's really interesting about the framework that this group has presented is that a lot of the thinking that grounds their approach to bringing their students into conversations about oppression, that's grounded in theory that comes from a community, the Black American community, that has, since we got here, tried to theorize and construct and develop tools for dealing with and dismantling a lot of what you have very expansively kind of, you started a kernel and then you look at it outward, but what they've used as a framework for talking about these things with their students is grounded in a group, the very group that you're talking about.
I think also too, it's important to give these kids, instead of being consumers and just accepting all of the imagery, accepting all the stories, no, be your own author and write yourself into the future and see yourself into the future and take the controls and write it. That's why one of the important there's so many artists that we're looking at to show us it's okay to be courageous and write your own story and let them they can consume, yes, but also create, and hopefully that will catalyze something into the next lifetime, their children's children.
I just really connect with this, and I was really impressed with this idea of authorship that you guys have. I've done some video work with teens in the past, and Sarah's collaborated with me on that. And watching them decide their story in these video projects differently from maybe what I would have anticipated they would want to talk about was really important for me to learn from them. And it's clearly something that you guys already know about. And so I just really connect with that work on the language of authorship, and then see what they come back with as a way to author their experiences. I think that art making is not always for students to reiterate feelings of their scenarios of oppression. I think sometimes they reiterate scenarios of strength and success, and a lot of other creative expressions that paint their story in ways that is important to them. And so I really appreciate, I think, the way that you've approached their storytelling from that perspective of a real, like a real capacity, right, to be the authors of their stories.
We're getting close to the end. And maybe Rachel and I could just use the last few minutes to thank the teacher teams that are here today, and I guess lately thank the folks that went yesterday as well, and just to really communicate how much we've enjoyed working with all of you, and having the opportunity to learn a lot from you all, and watching your process and seeing how your projects unfolded. For those of you that are here attending, we shared the activist art outcomes that the teachers have kind of used as a framework. In the workshops together, we talked a lot about how activist art outcomes really mirror civic dispositions of specifically the dispositions that I think don't get taught in schools, which is the part that happens outside of classrooms, right? Like, how can we impact the communities that we live in, and how can we use our communities as kind of the first step in creating kind of a chain reaction. So we will share all of the resources that these teachers used. Jessica and Sol showed little glimpses of the field guides. We're going to clean them up because they're sometimes in response to the meetings that we had with this group of teachers, and make them a bit more open-ended, and share those, because I think the three of them really take you through thinking about places and events and people, and how you can unpack those inside of your own community, and then bring that into your classroom to kind of ask your students to think inside your classroom about what happens outside of the classroom. So we'll share all that. Also, we'll share with everyone that registered a PD certificate with official FSU things on it. So if you need to ask for PD credit, you can use that. If you need us for anything with that, we're happy to help with it. We are, the next phase of this project, for anyone interested, is we've just gotten some funding to go to everyone's schools and see them teaching. We're so excited. Yeah. So COVID allowing, we will in the
Sarah and I
fall.
refuse to let go of you guys, so we're like staying in touch.
Yeah, we want to see the projects in action. So we're going to try to sneak up and over and down to go see these in action, and then hopefully, keep the ball rolling. So
and we'll find ways to kind of keep reporting back. This was the big dissemination event of the planning process. Our department, Sarah and I and our colleagues, we do run a monthly webinar series. So maybe at some point we can invite some of these teachers back to talk about how the implementation is going. We'll now, for those of you who have registered, you've kind of given us your email, and so we'll be able to reach back out if there's news on that as well. So hopefully we'll stay in touch. But really soon, Sarah and I will act quickly to get some of the planning materials up online, as well as these the resources that we used in the spring. So for those of you who are interested, that'll be a quick turnaround.
And I'll reiterate that this project was all the teachers. We gave a little bit of framing, but they have done an enormous amount of work to put together these units. So should be applauded for the time and energy and effort you've put into it. So thank you for sharing your time and ideas with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's
Yay.
been wonderful.
Thanks for coming and sitting with us the last 2 days and hearing all the really great work these teachers have done. We're so excited to see how it pans out. So